For today's topic, we are going to be looking at the political economy of a pandemic. I don't have, I don't have COVID, I promise.
So, the objective of discussion is to reflect upon the political and the economic factors that play a role in the response and outcome of COVID 19. And to start off, when COVID 19 was initially declared a pandemic, the organization that usually does that is the WHO, the World Health Organization. And there's a process that they have to go through in order to declare something as serious as COVID 19 a pandemic. And a lot of states felt like they were not able to effectively begin managing the situation when it first started because of something called the PHEIC.
PHEIC means Public Health Emergency of International Concern. So if something really bad is happening, like a disease, an outbreak, something of that nature, that's when this kicks in.
And so the sovereignty of states, some states felt like their sovereignty was greatly impeded by the fact that they could not do what they wanted to do until the WHO declared COVID 19 officially a pandemic. And even when they did do that, um, again, their sovereignty, some states felt like their sovereignty was impeded because they had to depend on the aid and assistance from other international organizations um, to take charge of the pandemic. We also see the power of transnational organizations coming out with within this pandemic. And
Organization, multinational, whichever you want to say, it's up to you, is an organization or company that has a headquarters in one area, one country, and operates within various territories. Think about the IOM, the International Organization for Migration. They have their office in Panama, but they even here, or even think Paho. Paho has a head office, but they're also here.
they can use it for export or anything really. Depends on what the good or service that they're offering is. And in the case of the pandemic, we're looking at the pharmaceutical companies because most of them are headquartered in the global north, those regions that are, you know, north of developing nations. They some because most of them are based in the northern hemisphere. But global north refers to many things, those countries that are more developed than the less developed countries, which are in the global south. And that's a discussion for a later date. But you can go back to one of our videos to see what we talk about when we refer to the global north and the global south. But essentially, we're looking, like I said, at the pharmaceutical companies, and we're looking at Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson, um, AstraZeneca. These were pharmaceutical companies that when the world was clamoring for a vaccine, they came up with a response with the swiftness, which was something that some people in civil society felt very, very hesitant to take, despite the mandates of governments that in order to get back out to work and return to normal, you have to take the vaccine. And a lot of people didn't want to take those vaccines because of how rapidly it was developed. There was some mistrust, right, from members of the public with regard to these vaccines. But when it comes to the power and the influence of those transnational organizations, it is very clear that some politics was at play. Um, so, for example, within the European Union, if it says persons wish to enter the European Union for to do anything at the height of the pandemic, and even now, you can only have, and you are vaccinated, you can only be vaccinated with the four acceptable vaccines according to the the European version of the CDC, but we can't call it the European version of the CDC. But you get what I'm talking about. So you would only be considered fully vaccinated if it is you have been in receipt of Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and not just any AstraZeneca. It has to be the AstraZeneca that was from Oxford and not the one that was developed in India. Um, or Johnson, right? And this was how the European governments felt that they would have protected their populations, right? Now, Russia created its own vaccine, Sputnik, and I was abroad when this pandemic hit, and I do believe that vaccine was available in some European countries, but there was a lot of speculation about that particular vaccine. A lot of people didn't trust it, right? With regard to Cuba in the developing world, a lot of people felt like, oh, Cuba has a vaccine. Well, they are leaders and they are pioneers in the medical field. Maybe we can take the vaccine that come out of Cuba. But Cuba spent a lot of money to develop that vaccine, and unfortunately, the World Health Organization did not validate that vaccine. And you see, even geopolitics playing off because Cuba to this day remains, for the most part, a socialist state. And because of the sanctions that have been placed against Cuba from since way back when during the Cold War, and to this day they're still in place, Cuba could not even begin to start trading that vaccine that would have been probably a very good vaccine in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. So companies like Pfizer and AstraZeneca, they would have probably lobbied to not have that vaccine validated to some extent. And despite AstraZeneca being one of the acceptable vaccines, companies like Pfizer and Moderna, they were competing for market share. Like it seems to be fairly obvious that they were competing for market share, because a lot of people even did not trust AstraZeneca, especially when the news about the blood clots came out. Johnson and Johnson had its own fair share of issues too with its own vaccine, because it was found that there was a small risk of persons developing Guillain-Barré syndrome, and Johnson and Johnson didn't fail on the market in the way that AstraZeneca did. So there seemed to be a lot of competition for market share, of which it was clear that Pfizer and Moderna won, because a lot of countries started to take their vaccines, the more acceptable vaccines, from Pfizer and Moderna, and because of it, the price for those vaccines went up. So while neoliberals like to tout about let the market determine the prices, when it came to the COVID-19 pandemic, the market did not determine the prices. It was supply and demand, and it was actually the states determining, a lot of state intervention too, determining what goods and services were being ordered en masse. So people were now buying more cleaning products.
In terms of supply and demand and cleaning products, this is very true. Just look at how many people were buying sanitizer. Just look at how many people were hoarding, and I repeat, hoarding toilet paper. That again was supply and demand. Regardless of the logic behind what they were doing, supply and demand definitely came in there.
People were buying PPE, personal protective gear, like the masks. Masks sold out really, really quickly, to the point that some states seized masks from going to other states so that they can have it for their own citizens. Yes, France, I'm looking at you.